At my grandson's baptism, in a church filled with family and celebration, my daughter-in-law leaned close and whispered, "You don't belong here." And in that single moment, I knew she intended to erase me from his life. My name is Margaret. I'm a mother, a widow, and now a grandmother. For years, my son was my anchor, the reason I kept moving forward after life took so much from me. I thought the hardest days were behind us. But family has a way of shifting when new people enter. What began as hope turned into distance, quiet dismissals, and moments that cut deeper than words. Stay with me as I take you through the years that led to that moment, the subtle exclusions, the hidden humiliations, and the quiet strength I chose instead of surrender. If this story draws you in, make sure to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me, where are you watching from? I love to see how far these stories travel. I became a widow when my son was still a boy. People often said children were resilient, that they bounced back faster than adults, but I could see the weight in his eyes, the silence he carried in those first months after his father's death. It was my job to hold us both together, to make sure that silence didn't turn into despair. There were mornings when I left the house before dawn, walking to the bus stop in the cold, my work shoes worn thin. I worked 2 jobs for a while, one at a small store and one cleaning offices at night. My son would stay with a neighbor until I came back. When I finally opened the door, he'd run into my arms, smelling faintly of soap and crayons. Those hugs erased the exhaustion in my bones, if only for a moment. We lived simply, but I tried to give him more than just the basics. Every birthday cake was homemade, even if the frosting leaned to one side. Every school project had my fingerprints on it, late nights cutting paper or gluing pieces together while he yawned beside me. We didn't have much, but he never went without love. As he grew older, I saw glimpses of his father in him. The way he stood, the way he thought carefully before speaking. But I also saw a strength that came from walking through hard years at my side. When he graduated high school, I cried harder than he did. It wasn't just pride, it was relief. Relief that I hadn't failed him. College, then his first real job came next. He called me often, sometimes just for a few minutes. He'd tell me about deadlines, coworkers, and the small frustrations of adulthood. I listened to it all. To me, every detail mattered. He was my pride, my anchor, the one who gave my life shape. So when he told me he had met someone, I was happy for him. He described her in a way that made me think she was exactly what he needed. Independent, smart, confident. He spoke about her with excitement, and I could hear in his voice that he wanted me to like her. The first time we met, she arrived at my house with him. I had cooked a meal, chicken roasted with herbs, potatoes the way my son always liked them, and an apple pie cooling on the counter. She stepped in, her perfume soft, her hair perfectly styled. She thanked me politely and handed me a bottle of wine. Her smile was there, but her eyes skimmed past me, settling on the details of the room instead. The pictures on the wall, the worn edges of the furniture. When I asked about her work, she answered quickly, then turned the conversation back to my son. It wasn't unkind, but it was distant. I told myself it was nerves. Meeting the mother of the man you're dating isn't easy. I thought with time she would relax and we'd find a rhythm. That night, as I washed the dishes, I whispered to myself, "She'll warm up. It just takes time." Time passed, and their relationship deepened. I was invited to dinners, birthdays, and small celebrations. At those gatherings, I tried to watch, to listen. She was always polite in front of others, smiling when needed, joining conversations when it suited her. But when her eyes fell on me, the smile seemed thinner, more measured.
The first moment that truly unsettled me happened at their engagement party. The house was bright with string lights, tables lined with food, music humming in the background. People laughed, glasses clinked, and I stood with a group of cousins, balancing a tray of small sandwiches I had made. I walked toward the kitchen to refill the tray when I heard her voice from the hallway. She was speaking to a close friend. "She's too involved in his life. That's going to change once we're married." The words landed like cold water on my skin. I stopped, my hands tightening around the tray. She wasn't joking. Her tone was steady, certain. I stepped back quietly, my shoes soft on the floor, and went around the other way to the kitchen. When I re-entered the room, I smiled and handed out food as though nothing had happened. My son's face was glowing with joy, and I would not stain that moment. But her words stayed with me. The first family dinner after the engagement showed me how quickly things were shifting. I set the table with care, placing dishes I knew my son loved: beef stew, bread rolls, roasted carrots. He reached for a roll with a smile, but she stopped him. "We're cutting back on bread." She slided the basket away.
He gave a small laugh, brushing it off, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. When I poured him a glass of wine, she placed her hand over the glass. "Not tonight, he's driving," she said, though I had always trusted him to know his limits. The corrections continued. If I told a story about my son's childhood, she would interrupt. "That's not quite how it happened," she'd say, even though she hadn't been there. Sometimes she laughed when she said it, but her laughter never reached her eyes. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive, but it became harder to deny. At another gathering, I mentioned a tradition from my husband's side of the family, a holiday dish we always made. She tilted her head and said, "We won't be doing that. We're starting our own traditions." Her tone was final. My son stayed quiet, his fork turning on the plate. Small incidents built on one another. Invitations began to arrive late or not at all. I learned about outings through other relatives, saw photos of gatherings posted online that I had not been invited to, birthdays celebrated without my presence, dinners where I was not thought of. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel in the open. It was quiet, steady, like a door closing slowly. Each time I reached for it, it seemed a little further out of reach. Yet through it all, I kept telling myself to wait, to give it more time, to hope she would soften, that she would come to see me not as competition, but as someone who only wanted to love the family she was building with my son. But the silence between us grew heavier, and the more I tried to hold on to my place, the more I felt it slipping from me. The first deep crack came at Christmas dinner. It was the first holiday they hosted together after the engagement. The house looked warm and bright from the outside, the windows glowing with light, the wreath on the door hung with care. I carried a dish I had prepared, roasted ham glazed the way my son had loved since childhood. It was a recipe I had made every year, one that always reminded him of his father. Inside, the table was set perfectly, silverware gleaming, candles burning softly. Guests were chatting, coats being hung, children laughing in the living room. My son kissed me on the cheek when I entered, thanking me for the ham. I felt that familiar joy of being near him, of seeing him happy in his own home. Dinner began with laughter and small talk, plates passed around, glasses raised. When the ham was placed in the center, my son leaned forward with a smile. "Mom's ham," he said, "best part of Christmas." He reached to cut a slice, but she stopped him. "Actually," she said, her voice calm but carrying across the table, "we don't eat food like this anymore. Too much sugar in the glaze." The room fell quiet for a moment. Her words weren't cruel, but they cut through the celebration like a blade. My son froze, then gave a small laugh that didn't sound natural. "It's just one night," he murmured, reaching again. She placed her hand over his. "No," she said firmly, "we agreed." Everyone watched. Some shifted in their chairs, unsure of how to respond. I sat still, my fork untouched, my face warm under the weight of their eyes. My son finally withdrew his hand, leaning back in his chair. She passed another dish his way, smiling as though nothing had happened. The laughter returned slowly, but the warmth of the evening was gone for me. I sat at the table, listening, nodding, pretending to enjoy myself. But inside, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't simply setting boundaries. She was drawing lines that pushed me further away. That night, as I gathered my coat, my son hugged me quickly. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, his voice low. I smiled and wished them both good night, but the walk home felt colder than the winter air. Months passed, and then came the news. She was pregnant. My son told me over the phone, his voice bright with excitement. I cried, holding the phone close, overwhelmed by the thought of becoming a grandmother. I pictured myself rocking the baby, singing the same lullabies I had sung to him, passing down little pieces of the family history. But as the months moved forward, I noticed how tightly she guarded the pregnancy. When I asked if I could come to appointments, she hesitated. "It's not necessary," she said. "We'll keep you updated." When I offered to help prepare the nursery, she smiled politely. "We've got it handled." I told myself it was normal, that many new mothers wanted privacy, but the distance grew wider with every conversation. When the baby was born, I wasn't called. The first photo of my grandson came through a text from my son hours later, a picture of a small, swaddled boy with his eyes closed tight. My heart swelled, but also ached. I asked if I could come to the hospital. "She's tired," he said, gently. "Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow came, and then the day after, and still I was told to wait. Friends asked me if I had seen him yet, and I had to smile and shake my head. By the time I was invited, the baby was already home, wrapped in blankets, settled into their space. When I held him at last, his tiny fingers curling around mine, I felt joy so deep it brought tears to my eyes. But standing in the corner of the room, I saw her watching me carefully, her arms crossed. She allowed me the moment, but I felt the warning in her gaze. I was welcome only when she allowed it, only on her terms. The months after his birth were filled with small signs of what was to come. I was not asked to babysit, though I offered. Photos of his first smile, his first laugh, reached me only through social media or relatives who had seen them first. Traditions I had dreamed of sharing, the special blanket my mother had knit, the songs, the little games, were kept aside, not wanted. Still, I held on to the hope of the baptism. It was a sacred event, a chance for family to gather, for blessings to be given, for me to take my place as grandmother in front of everyone. I bought a new dress, simple but elegant. I wore my husband's cross, the one he had worn every Sunday, believing it would bring a piece of him into that day. Walking into the church, I tried to push away the unease. The stained glass glowed with light, the pews filled with relatives and friends. My son stood near the altar, holding his child, pride shining in his face. I wanted to focus only on that, the joy of seeing him as a father, the sight of my grandson dressed in white. When the priest called for the blessing, I moved closer, ready to reach for him. My hands trembled with anticipation. But as I leaned forward, her hand caught my arm. She smiled for the others, her expression calm and sweet. Then, close to my ear, her voice turned sharp. "You don't belong here." The words were soft, almost invisible to anyone else, but they struck with a force that left me frozen. I stood still, unable to move, the sound of prayers continuing around me.
the people watching the ceremony unaware of what had just been said. My son looked ahead, never turning to see my face. I stayed silent. I did not argue, did not draw attention, though my chest felt heavy. I stood in the pew as the baptism ended, clapping when others clapped, smiling when others smiled. But inside, I felt hollow. When it was over, I walked out of the church into the bright sunlight. Laughter and conversation filled the air around me, but I felt alone in the crowd. Families gathered in groups, photos were taken, hugs were exchanged. I stood apart, my hands clasped, my voice caught in my throat. That day was meant to be filled with joy, but instead, it became a turning point. It was no longer about small corrections at dinner or missed invitations. It was a clear declaration. She wanted me out. And though no one else had heard it, I carried those words with me, heavy and sharp, long after the church bells faded. When the ceremony ended, the church doors opened, and the crowd spilled out into the sunlight. People were gathering in small groups, laughing, taking photos, passing the baby from one set of arms to another. I stood to the side, watching, my hands clasped together so tightly they ached. My son smiled for the camera, his arm around his wife, their child cradled between them. The picture of a perfect family. No one noticed how still I was. No one saw how hard it was for me to breathe. When the final photographs were taken, I slipped away. I didn't wait for the meal afterward. I walked to my car, the sound of the church bells fading behind me. Inside, the quiet wrapped around me. The smell of old leather filled the air. I sat there for a long time, my hands resting on the steering wheel, the weight of her words replaying in my mind. You don't belong here. They weren't just about the baptism. They weren't just about that day. They carried the weight of years, all the moments I had ignored, all the signs I had brushed aside. Sitting there, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. The memories came one by one, sharper now. The engagement party, when I heard her say, "She's too involved in his life." The Christmas dinner, when she pulled the bread away, correcting me in front of everyone. The hospital, where I waited days just to see my grandson for the first time. The birthdays I found out about only after they happened. The family photos that appeared online, filled with smiles and gatherings I hadn't been invited to. All the moments stacked together like stones, building a wall that kept me outside. I thought back to the times I had asked simple questions. When is the dinner? Or what time should I come? And how her answers were always vague, often last minute. I realized that some invitations had never reached me at all. My son would mention an event in passing, surprised I hadn't known, and I had smiled, pretending I was fine. I wasn't fine. The truth was clear now. She had been erasing me, piece by piece. For a while, I sat there in the car, wondering what to do next. The easy path would have been anger, calling out what I knew, demanding answers. But I understood what that would cost me. A confrontation would only push my son further away, force him to choose, and I knew who he would choose. He loved me, but he lived with her. His loyalty was tied to the family he had built. I also knew begging wouldn't work. Pleading for a place would only prove her point, show her that she held the power. So I sat in the car and made a quiet choice. I would not fight her directly. I would not beg. I would endure. That didn't mean giving up. It meant finding other ways. Smaller, quieter ways. I began with letters. Simple notes written on soft paper addressed to my grandson. I wrote about the world around me, about the flowers blooming in the garden, about the birds he might one day recognize. I wrote about his father's childhood, the games he used to play, the way his eyes lit up when he first learned to ride a bike. I sealed each letter carefully and tucked them away in a box. One day, I told myself, he would read them, and know that his grandmother had always thought of him. I opened a small savings account in his name. Nothing grand, just what I could manage each month. A quiet promise for his future. A way to give even if I wasn't invited to share in the present. I also kept my door open for my son. I never spoke harshly about his wife. When he visited alone, I cooked the meals he loved, asked about his work, listened without judgment. I let him see that my love for him hadn't changed, even though the space between us had. And outside of them, I built a life for myself. I planted more in the garden, filling the soil with color and life. I took walks by the river, let the quiet of the trees remind me of peace. I made friends who welcomed me without conditions. Slowly, I created a circle that didn't depend on her approval. It wasn't the life I had imagined. It wasn't the closeness I had dreamed of when I first heard I would be a grandmother. But it was life, steady and enduring. The pain didn't vanish. Some nights I sat at my table, looking at the box of letters, wishing I could be there for the small milestones, the first word, the first step. But then I reminded myself, I had given all I could. I had chosen not to vanish. And that choice, quiet as it was, gave me strength. After the baptism, I stopped expecting invitations. Instead of waiting by the phone or checking messages with hope, I turned my energy elsewhere. If I was being pushed out of their home, I would build a space of my own where I couldn't be erased. I began with the letters. At first, I didn't know what to write, only that I wanted my grandson to know me beyond what anyone else told him. So I started small. Today, the roses bloomed in the garden, I wrote. Your father used to help me water them when he was your age. The words flowed slowly at first, then more freely as the days passed. I wrote about the little things, how the sparrows built nests near the window, how the neighbor's cat wandered through the yard, how the seasons changed. I wanted him to have a record of the world as I saw it. Simple pieces of life that he might one day read and know came from me. Each letter I folded with care, slipped into an envelope, and placed inside a wooden box I kept on the shelf. I didn't tell anyone about the box. It was mine, a secret promise between me and the child who didn't yet know me. Next came the savings account. The amount wasn't large, but it grew each month as I added to it. To me, it wasn't about money. It was about leaving a mark, a quiet contribution to his future. I pictured him one day using it for books, for studies, or for something that mattered to him. It was my way of being present in a life I wasn't fully allowed to share. At home, I poured myself into the garden. The soil became my companion, the plants my daily work. I planted rows of vegetables, filled the flower beds with colors, and watched life rise from the ground season after season. Working there gave me peace. Each seed I placed in the earth felt like a declaration, I am still here. I also found an old cabin for sale outside of town. It wasn't grand, but it was quiet, tucked between tall trees with a view of the river. I used what savings I had and made it mine. Fixing it up kept my hands busy, painting the walls, repairing the roof, sanding the floors. Slowly, it became a retreat, a place where I could breathe without judgment, where I could invite friends again, where laughter filled the air. Through these acts, I refused to vanish. She might keep me at arm's length, but I would not disappear. One evening, my son came by alone. He stood in the doorway of my kitchen, his shoulders slumped, his face tired. I made him tea, and we sat together at the table, the air heavy with words unspoken. After a long silence, he said, "Mom, I don't know why she's so hard on you." I looked at him, the boy I had raised, now a man caught between two worlds. His eyes showed guilt, confusion, and a helplessness I recognized. I reached for his hand. "You don't have to explain," I said softly. "I don't need her approval to love you or him." He lowered his eyes, his grip tightening around mine for a moment before he let go. We didn't speak of it again, but something passed between us in that silence. He knew where I stood. He knew I would not turn away from him, no matter how far she pushed me aside. The months moved quickly, and soon it was time for my grandson's first birthday. I was invited this time, though I suspected it was more obligation than choice. I went anyway, carrying a small gift, wrapped in paper with bright balloons. The house was filled with people, decorations strung across the walls, the air buzzing with chatter. I stayed near the edge of the room, not wanting to cause tension, not wanting to intrude. I smiled when people spoke to me, laughed when I was included, but kept my distance. The cake was brought out, candles lit, voices singing. My grandson sat in a high chair, his eyes wide at the sight of the flame. He clapped his small hands when the song ended, his face smeared with frosting as they gave him a piece. Then came the moment that stays with me still. He was set down on the floor, free to crawl among the guests. People reached out to him, calling his name, holding out toys to draw his attention. He looked around, his eyes moving past them, past the noise, until they settled on me. I was sitting quietly in the corner, watching, saying nothing. He paused, then began to crawl, past the toys, past the outstretched hands, straight toward me. When he reached me, he pulled himself up against my knees, his small hands gripping the fabric of my dress. I bent down, lifted him gently, and held him close. His head rested against my shoulder, his warmth steady against me. The room grew quieter for a moment, all eyes watching. She said nothing. My son smiled faintly, a softness in his eyes that told me he had noticed too. I didn't need words. That simple act was enough. In that moment, I felt a quiet triumph. No whisper, no exclusion, no forced smile could erase the bond between us. It was there, silent but strong, proven in the way he chose me on his own. That day, as I walked home, I carried not just the memory of holding him, but the certainty that I had not been erased. She might control invitations, meals, or traditions, but she could not control the pull of love that runs deeper than her plans. My grandson had found me in a crowded room, and I knew he always would. The weeks after the birthday passed quietly. Nothing changed between me and my daughter-in-law. Her eyes still carried the same distance whenever they landed on me. Her words, when directed my way, stayed clipped and polite, never warm. Boundaries remained firm, lines carefully drawn to keep me on the edge of their world. I stopped expecting warmth from her. That kind of welcome was never going to come. Not now, maybe not ever. Accepting that was hard at first, but slowly it gave me a kind of peace. I realized I didn't need her approval to exist in my grandson's life. I didn't need her open arms or forced smiles. I had my own ways, my own presence, one she couldn't erase no matter how she tried. The longing, I understood, isn't something handed to you like a gift. It isn't granted or withheld at someone else's whim. Belonging is claimed, built, rooted in the choices you make every day to remain present, no matter how the world shifts around you. What she tried to take from me wasn't just a seat at the table. It was my sense of worth, my place in the story of my own family. But she didn't succeed. If anything, she taught me something I hadn't expected: resilience. I learned that revenge doesn't always arrive in loud, dramatic gestures. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it looks like survival, like refusing to disappear. It looks like writing a letter every week, even if it won't be read for years. It looks like planting a garden and watching it bloom, season after season, as proof that life continues.
It looks like being present in every small way you can, until one day, a child finds his way to you through a crowded room without needing to be told who you are. That is the kind of revenge I chose. Not to hurt, but to endure, to remain, to exist in ways she could never erase. One evening, I sat in my garden as the sun sank low on the horizon. The sky burned with soft colors, orange, pink, and deep violet, spilling across the air like paint on canvas. The roses glowed in the fading light, their petals open wide, their scent rich and sweet.
Somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a child's laughter. It carried on the wind, weaving its way through the quiet of the evening. I closed my eyes and let it settle over me, soft as a promise. I didn't know what the future held. Perhaps my daughter-in-law would never soften. Perhaps the space between us would never close. But I knew this much. I was here. I had survived. I had claimed my place, whether she liked it or not. The camera of memory lingers on the garden, on the slow setting of the sun, on the soft laughter that drifts in the background. And in the silence of my heart, I speak the words that carry me forward. I am here. I always will be. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. It wasn't easy to tell, but it's a reminder that strength isn't always loud. It's steady, it's quiet, and it endures. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this one. And let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing the places these stories reach. Until next time, take care of yourselves and hold close the people who truly see you.